Hello, it's May 2022, and before I get into this video, I want to touch up on two topics really quick. One, I know many people don't like what I have to say or share because reality is terrible, very terrible, and it is what it is. And a lot of people either don't want to accept it or can't accept it because it's overwhelming, and I get that, and I'm living it. And the second thing I would like to address before I get into this video is around December 2015. One of the news agencies in Ontario, Canada, did a, I guess you can call it like an expose piece or something with regards to investigating police and judicial and political structures across Canada. And what they determined, what they concluded, was that Calgary, Alberta, Canada, has the most corrupt police, judicial, and political structure in all of Canada. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, oh, but they have a story, or they heard of a story, whatever. I'm just telling you that this is what this particular news agency uncovered. I'm going to also add that other police agencies, especially in Ontario, look at the Calgary police, other police forces, and other police officers look at the Calgary police as the worst. They have the worst reputation and the least amount of respect. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, what I'm going to talk about in this video should irate everyone. Now, I've said for many, many years about the corruption, and I've showed independent evidence on how, for example, just focusing on the criminal charges, forget about the backstory with regards to the sex trafficking and abuse of these vulnerable women and everything else, which is how my story started. Just focusing on the judicial corruption in the city of Calgary. And I've shown independent evidence how I was railroaded for the alleged charges of obstruction and assaulting a police officer, and how even trial transcripts had portions, for example, like the redirect in November of 2013 of the first former officer's testimony, where he blatantly admitted to beating me for, linking back to the backstory, as his form of street justice on behalf of the female, and to silence me, to teach me a lesson, supposedly. I've shown all this, and I've talked about this, and so much more. Even how my conviction, the criminal trial judge that was presiding, Bill Cummings, cast doubt 3 times on convicting me. Now, for anyone who doesn't understand why that is important, because in Canada and the USA, you need to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. He cast doubt 3 times. So this video is inspired by 2 videos by Steve Lehto, and I'm going to leave the links to his videos as well as the subject video in the description box below. And I recommend that everyone go over to Steve Lehto's channel. He has 2 of them. Subscribe, give his videos a like. He does a very good job at breaking things down. And I just want to highlight something, that he is still a practicing lawyer, over 30 years practicing law in the state of Michigan, United States. And so his perspective is going to be as a practicing lawyer. And whether he has more to say or not, I'm not going to even speculate, but definitely he does offer good insight and breakdowns of different cases, and people write cases to him. So go over, subscribe, give his videos a like, and show your support, because he is doing a very good service to people overall. And as I said in a previous video that ended up on the cutting floor, he practices law in the state of Michigan, but a lot of what he talks about, and he talks about other cases from other states, not only applies to the United States, but it also can carry over into Canada, for example. Anyway, so basically he was talking about a video where an accused person, a defendant, was defending a DUI charge, drinking and driving under the influence, whatever. And this guy was proclaiming his innocence. Now, apparently there's a whole story behind his arrest and it being bogus and everything else, and that's a different topic. But he ended up having apparently 2 public defenders, and they threw him under the bus. So I'm going to quickly interject here my personal first-hand experience with so-called court-appointed defense attorneys. And this has to do with June of 2013, when I was dealing with the restraining order that the female who's behind the whole sex trafficking, abuse of vulnerable women, and the false allegation and everything else, and how she was pressured into filing a restraining order against me. She was pressured to do so I could not use her in my defense on the events that took place less than a month prior on May 4th, 2013. The police assault on me, which they spun around, etc. I had my post-traumatic stress was probably at its peak, and I remember that whole summer I couldn't even make a sentence. I couldn't put 2 words together to talk. And I remember everything, the sounds and seeing things. It was so crisp, so clear because of the post-traumatic stress. There was extreme signs of shock, and I was still dealing with that actually for the whole summer, right up until the fall. And so I couldn't respond properly to the restraining order, but I did. And I remember going in to talk to a court-appointed lawyer to represent me on that. Now, this woman is your stereotypical social justice feminist garbage. And I'm being very polite, because when I was trying to explain to her, and I was being as brief as possible, but I had to explain the whole backstory, she said to me she didn't care. She didn't have time to deal with it. Now, just so people know, when you deal with one of these court-appointed defense lawyers, they want you to sign a waiver, so you can't go after them for anything. And basically, they can do whatever they want, and you have no recourse. And she wouldn't represent me, and I didn't want to sign off on that. So what I ended up doing was signing under duress. I put that very clear and asked for a copy of that, and I still have that copy. She went into the courtroom and just basically didn't really do anything for me. And I wanted to so badly to speak up, but my post-traumatic stress, I couldn't. I was in shock. Also now dealing with this nonsensical restraining order. So as with this case, as I'm highlighting in this video, the same type of thing. Now, there was one other time around that time where I had to go back, and I spoke to a court-appointed defense lawyer, wanted me to sign. I refused to sign, and they said no. So be mindful when you go to court and you're going to think, oh, I'm going to rely on them. If you sign it, you have no recourse. And I'm just going to expand on the recourse part, is that when I terminated my second lawyer, I went through 4 different processes successfully against him because he threw me under the bus. I taxed the account. I was successful with that. And I guess in the States, you would call it a grievance against the lawyer. I sued, filed 2 complaints, and I was successful. So if I would have signed that for the court-appointed so-called defense lawyer, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to sign something like that, be very clear to write under duress. And I mean, you can expand on that, but that's probably the simplest, best, easiest way to go about it. So I just wanted to throw that in. Now, what makes his case more interesting is not only does he would have, for example, independent evidence that I would, but there's the video and audio recording of the injustice from within the court. So the court records of their own video and audio shows how his 2 public defenders, his defense lawyers, threw him under the bus. And not only that, how the prosecutor of that case, or in the courtroom for that day, completely went along with it, how the judge presiding over the cases of the day went along with it, and how even the court clerks, including the judge, laughed at the injustice that they were imposing on this guy. And this guy ended up in jail for 2 weeks. Now, I know a lot of people focus on and think, oh, people who are incarcerated for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, well, let's just focus on them. And I've been saying for many years how these injustices, the bigger cases, the few that we hear about, which is a drop in the bucket, happen every day. And here's an example of someone having injustice imposed on them that was video and audio recorded by the court equipment. It happens every day, and this is what I'm trying to highlight. Now, court started at 9 o'clock. His two defense lawyers called his case up at 8:45 and asked the judge to have their client arrested, have a bench warrant issued. 15 minutes before he was to have, or the court was to have started for his case. Now, as Steve Lehto highlights, that there's a court docket. In that docket, there's a whole list of people. So all these people would be told to show up at 9 o'clock because your case can be called at any time. And normally what they would do in the courtroom is, for example, if there's anything, say any pleas or adjournments or anything like that, those will be dealt with first. They deal with people who are represented first and then go down that list. People who are self-represented would come after, because they want to get the lawyers or agents through the courts so that they can move on with their day because of their caseload. And then the people at the end of the day, for example, who are self-representing would be heard. And then people who don't show up, for example, in Ontario, Canada, would get what we call 9.1 convictions, 9.1 under the section convictions. So people didn't show up at the very end of the day, so they would be convicted. Now, with this guy's case, his defense attorneys and lawyers asked the judge 15 minutes before he was to show up. Now, the guy did show up at 9:07 because he got tied up going through court security and everything else, and he got there at 9:07. He's seen one of the two lawyers, that his defense lawyers, and you can see in the video where he was talking to her 10 minutes after he arrived, so at 9:17. And they made him wait, I think, about an hour and a half before they called him again. Now, by this time, there's a bench warrant. He was arrested in the hallway of the courthouse. So he's brought in handcuffs. Now, keep in mind, this guy is thinking, yeah, he's going to appear and then he's going to go home or do whatever. But they arrest him. They detain him for 2 weeks on the spot. His defense lawyer, the one that remained, didn't say, yes, I spoke to him. She kept quiet, which is another problem in itself. And the judge even added a whole bunch of false information. So the prosecutor, I believe it was the prosecutor that said, oh, he arrived an hour and a half, 2 hours late because, they're already coming up to noon before they recalled him. And the judge went along with that narrative, adding her own falsehoods to it. And they made up this whole false narrative about him, that he has a history of not showing up to court or whatever. Now, his original DUI case, if I'm not mistaken, began in 2014. So his case went on for 5 years. 5 years. They dragged it out. And apparently during the 5 years, and you got to keep in mind, there's a lot of court cases that he's appearing to. He was late for one and he missed one over 5 years. Now, my case lasted 49 months, and I had court appearance after court appearance, and the Crown prosecutor asking for adjournments and court delays and everything else. So over a 5-year span, you think of how many court appearances he should have made to be late for one and even possibly miss one. I'm not saying, to treat it nonchalantly, because it's important, but humans make mistakes. So, long story short, he ended up having to plead guilty because now he's in jail for 2 weeks. His brother had to post, I think it was a $17,000 bond. His brother didn't have the money, but he needed the money back. So the guy ended up having to plead guilty, despite him professing his innocence throughout the whole 5 years. So they railroaded him to plead guilty, just like they railroaded me with the lawsuit, forcing my hand to withdraw because I had to pay costs forthwith, meaning immediately, and if I didn't, I could have been held in contempt and thrown in jail until it was paid, and my life would have been a lot worse. Anyway, so I really want to highlight this case that Steve Lehto has talked about twice, and I'm pretty sure he'll do a follow-up as this guy's story unfolds. This guy is now suing the two defense lawyers. I forget all who he's suing, because they threw him under the bus. And this is, as far as I know, this is where we're at with this. Now there's lawyers defending the public defenders, the defense lawyers saying that, you know, there's no evidence, there's no justification for this, despite the court's own video and audio recordings of how this guy was railroaded. And I really want to highlight the fact that this type of thing happens every day to different degrees, but it happens every day. And my working within the legal system myself, you just treat files as files. You kind of get detached to some degree that there's a human being or human beings being impacted, whether it be, for example, defending a summary criminal, provincial offense, or even when you're suing, you forget, you're kind of detached that the other party, there's human beings and everyone's life is being impacted. Now, for myself in the province of Ontario, within the system, I've never seen anything to what I've seen in Calgary, Alberta. In fact, I haven't seen any kind of corruption at all. I'm not saying that Ontario is perfect. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, professionally and personally, I've never experienced that in the province of Ontario. But province of Alberta and the city of Calgary, I mean, you couldn't get more blatant. What you will see in that video is the type of thing that I experienced in the city of Calgary. And I know it might be hard for some to believe, or even if people want to accept my story with the evidence, well, that's just, you know, that's just you. And then why you type of thing, right? Well, here's an example from the United States of this very type of thing happening to someone else that was captured on video and audio. This is the world that we live in, and this is what I've been really trying to emphasize. And I'm just gonna slightly segue, and I've said this before, there's a lot of people who call themselves freedom fighters and truthers and stuff, and they want to, for example, stop tyranny, whether it's real or perceived, that's not my point, but they want to basically save a nation, their country, save the world from this whatever injustice and tyranny, but they can't or won't deal with small cases. You have to learn to walk before you can run. And this injustice that I'm talking about with my case and this other guy's case that Steve Lehto has highlighted happens every day. If you want to stop tyranny, it begins with the countless of little cases, and I've been saying this for years. Unfortunately, my words have been falling on deaf ears. Anyway, that's all I really want to say about this. Bring this to light, how this type of thing happens all the time, not just to me. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.